management to optimize your reproduction performance. And then, did you record?
Yes, I have.
Oh, perfect. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to keep this pretty informal, so if you have questions or want to have discussion as we go throughout, just feel free to interrupt me. It's a small enough room, we can have hopefully some good discussion. So today we're going to focus on talking about different management options and strategies to deal with the problem we have with some of our young cows, right? So we know our 2- and 3-year-old cows are often our hardest animals to get bred. I'm really filling up freaking here. Can you wait a minute?
Go. Good over here.
So our young cows are often our hardest group to get bred back. And so we're going to focus on different management strategies that we can think about to maybe improve that reproductive performance and help us have them do a little bit better. So we know that reproduction is really important for profitability within our cow-calf operation, right? Our overall goal is for us to have a live calf from every cow and have that calf make it to meat. So her ability to reproduce is very important. While nutrition is also very important, I would say reproduction maybe is the key there, especially on the cow-calf side, okay? We also know that reproductive failure is one of the largest reasons that cows are culled. And so USDA survey in 2017 reported producers reported 40.5% of cows that were culled for pregnancy status, so that they were open, which is a little alarming, right? That's a lot of cows being culled because they're open, okay? With that, we generally have to replace those animals, so 15 to 20% of our herd is going to have to be replaced annually. That means that we're going to have to be either replacing those with heifers that we're developing ourselves, or bringing in young cows, or even mature cows, okay? And this isn't a heifer development talk, so we're not going to dive into that, which is my favorite subject to talk about, but we won't get there, okay? But we do know that it takes that animal a while, okay? So we've developed her to the best of our ability. It takes her a while to recoup those development costs, right? She's hopefully calving for the first time at 24 months of age or 2 years of age, but then she still has to raise and wean that calf before we actually get a paycheck from her. There's been several studies that suggested that the net revenue from 6 calves was needed to cover development and production costs for replacement heifers. So if she falls out of the herd as a 2- or 3-year-old animal, she can't get bred back. Now we've placed economic pressure on the other animals within that cohort, right? She has not paid for herself, so we have a loss on that animal. And so making sure she's not only successful that first year, but she's successful as a 2- and 3-year-old cow and gets bred back consistently is going to be really important for us. So we'll talk consistently throughout about reproductive efficiency. We will talk about other management strategies, not just reproduction, but I think it's important for us to maybe put a definition to what reproductive efficiency means within our cow herds. And so this might change based on your operation, your specific goals that you have. But to me, if I put a simplified kind of broad definition on it, reproductive efficiency to me is looking at optimizing the pregnancy rate early in the breeding season and selecting and developing replacement heifers that are highly fertile at the lowest cost possible, right? If we want animals that are going to consistently stay in the herd, we're going to talk about why that early in the breeding season is underlined here in a few minutes. And if any of you have heard me give a talk, I always manage to slip this topic in and these slides in, because I think it's a really important one for us to be thinking about, okay? So kind of keep that definition in your mind as we're going throughout. So let's talk just for a second about the challenges that we have with young cow reproduction, okay? Typically pregnancy rates are going to be lowest within that group. So those trying to get those first and second calf heifers bred back, they're going to be the hardest ones for us to breed back, right? So what are some of those challenges that make them the hardest group to breed back? Nutrition, right? Right off the bat. So that cow doesn't reach her mature size until about 4 or 5 years of age, okay? So she not only has requirements for gestation right before she calves, but she's also still growing, okay? Once she calves, she now has her highest requirement when she hits peak lactation, in addition to that growth requirement. So she has our highest nutrient requirements within the herd. And so from a nutritional standpoint, we'll get to talking about why that's so important, okay? The other is calving and dystocia, right? She has never had a calf before, and so this is a totally new experience. Okay, she's also not at that mature size, so any calving or dystocia problems that we may have is also going to hinder her ability to start cycling and get bred back within a timely manner. Okay, resumption of cyclicity. That goes back to that nutritional management as well as her fertility, as well as any dystocia problems that we have. Okay, if she doesn't start cycling back before or even at the start of that next breeding season, it's going to be incredibly hard to get her rebred that next time. Okay, we also have the addition of a suckling stimulus from that calf, right? She's nursing a calf, and that stimulus will actually delay her some in being able to start cycling again and breed back. Now, there's not a great way around that unless we do some short-term calf removal or early weaning in some situations. We'll talk about that for just a second, but there's not a huge way to overcome that hurdle. And then again, those additional nutrient requirements, okay? So economically, even though I love to talk about heifers, from an economic standpoint, our 2-year-old cow is probably where we need to put some emphasis, right? She's our most expensive and valuable animal, okay? Because she has higher nutrient requirements that we need to be accounting for, and she also hasn't paid for herself, right? So if she falls out of the herd now, we're losing money. So she's pretty valuable to us as wanting to keep her in the herd, okay? So there's a lot of value to improving pregnancy rates in those 2-year-old cows versus our yearling heifers, okay? One of the big challenges that we're gonna face with those, getting those young cows rebred is that postpartum and estrus period. So after she calves, she has to start cycling again. So that's what we're referring to as her postpartum and estrus period, okay? So during this period, she has to do several things. First thing is that uterus is gonna have to repair from the calving process, okay? So she's gonna have to go through uterine involution and have complete repair of that uterus. That can take time depending on how difficult the birth or calving situation was, okay? Can also take time if she's in a poor state of nutrition or poor body condition, okay? She also has to resume ovulating and having normal estrus cycles, okay? So even though she's repaired her uterus, she actually still needs to have a short luteal phase, okay? So I'm trying not to get into the weeds with the estrus cycle here, okay? But she needs to have a short spike in progesterone before she'll actually resume normal cyclicity, okay? So that's what this kind of gray bar in the middle is, okay? So this is approximate days after calving. So that bottom one is gonna be uterine involution. That generally is gonna take her anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 weeks in time for her to go through repair and have that uterus shrink back down in size. It's also gonna take her some time then for her reproductive system to kind of reset. And she needs that short exposure to progesterone to kind of reprogram and prime that system to start cycling again, okay? And then that postpartum and estrus period can still last quite a ways depending on her nutritional status and a lot of different factors that we'll kind of talk about, okay? Any questions so far? I'm trying not to talk super fast. But. Okay, so the one thing to think about is that in order for her to hopefully maintain a yearly calving interval or a 365-day calving interval, okay, she needs to cycle, she has about 80 days after she calves to when she needs to start cycling again, which sounds like a really long time, right? But it's really not, okay? Because if she's the last animal of the calving season to calve, 80 days might be at the very end of that next breeding season or even past it before she's completely recovered, depending on how long her breeding season is, okay? So one comment I get sometimes is, well, in the young cows, could we just extend that calving season? Would that be a viable option to get more of those animals that are maybe falling back in the herd? And so I found this graph a while back where they actually looked at kind of pregnancy rates based on length of the breeding season. And we don't gain really anything by extending the breeding season out, because some of those animals that maybe weren't going to get bred in a 70 or even a 90-day breeding season, they probably aren't going to get bred even if we extend it out to 110, 150 days, right? Which I don't know about you, I don't want to be calving for quite that length of time, right? I'd like to edge on the side of 60 or 70 days and be done with that, okay? But that's not not necessarily going to fix the problem. So just leaving the bull out longer isn't going to necessarily fix that problem, okay? So if we think about that reproductive efficiency equation that we had, okay, we could break that down, right? We wanted those animals to get bred early so that they can calve early, as well as develop and manage heifers at lowest cost possible and be highly fertile. Okay, so if we break that down, we could think about that as management. Okay, so overall management decisions we're making, nutrition and health, and then selection pressure. Okay, what's the biggest influence on management? I saw somebody with money. Close.
9.
You as the manager, right? You have the biggest influence because you're making the decisions, right? So not a trick question. Okay, time and money certainly go into that as well and affect your decision making, but you as the manager have the ultimate decision. Okay, so we'll talk about selection pressure first. Okay, so one of the things I think from a selection standpoint, okay, I'm not going to tell you should pick out this specific breed or this specific animal and that's going to fix all of your problems, but I do think if we're placing selection pressure for early calving cows and heifers, that can really help us, especially in our young cows. Okay. So what this graph is depicting is days of the calving season and then cows failing to calve as a percentage, okay? So you can see as we extend out in days of the calving season, those animals that calve later have a higher chance of failing to calve the next year or failing to get bred back, which should make sense, right? Because unfortunately they didn't look at our calendar and go, well, I only have 80 days to start cycling back, right? Or only have 40 days depending on when they calve, okay? So we need those animals that are kind of shifted up to this front part, okay? That's gonna allow us to keep those animals in the herd because they have more time to recover, right? If she's the very first animal to calve, she has a longer time before the next breeding season and more chances if she's cycling at the start of that next breeding season to get bred, okay? So one of the data sets that I think really illustrates kind of the power of selecting for those early calving heifers or cows, okay, is this data set from Nebraska. So this research was done at the U.S. Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska, and they took records from 16,000 head of heifers that were classified just based on when they calved during their very first calving season. So the green line is those that calved in the first 21 days, the black line is those that calved between days 22 and 42, and then the red line is those that calved greater than 43 days into the calving season. And when they followed those animals out and looked at the percentage of heifers remaining in the herd over 9 calving seasons, those animals that calved early as a heifer stayed in the herd longer. So there was a greater proportion of those animals remaining in the herd out at 7, 8, 9 years of age, right? So now they've paid for themselves and they're providing us a return on that investment at that time point, okay? And again, nothing different here from a nutrition standpoint. All they did, all you could do is potentially select those animals that got bred early and are gonna calve early. And that will improve their longevity and ability to stay in that herd. The other piece of that is they also looked at average weaning weight across those animals. So I apologize for the color change. These 1 to 21 are the black bars, the gray is 22 to 42, and the white is 43 and after. So when they looked at average weaning weight of those calves born to those cows in those different categories, okay, they not only saw an improvement in average weaning weight in that first year, but they saw a significant improvement in average weaning weight over the first 6 calves. And when you add up that additional weaning weight there, they wean almost 3/4 to a whole calf more over their lifetime. So not only is she staying in the herd longer, right? So she's at least recouping her development costs, providing us some return on investment. She's also being more productive over her lifespan, okay? And that's simply just that calf has the opportunity to be older and heavier when we get to wean, okay? So just in year 1 alone, I went in and calculated it's about 133-pound difference between those calves that were born in that first calving period versus those born later. Okay, if we had our good feeder steer prices like we do right now, okay, that would be about $406 advantage for those calves. I think I would take that, right? That's quite a bit of money in your pocket just from, again, getting those animals bred early. So from a selection standpoint, I think this starts as a heifer, right? I don't think this is necessarily something you do with your 2 and 3-year-old cows, but as a heifer, we need to be thinking about how she's going to perform in our herd during her lifetime. And so we should be considering how we select heifers that are going to become pregnant early in the breeding season. Okay, we could do that a number of ways. Maybe that first way is we only retain heifers bred in the first 30 days. Okay, so we turn out a few more heifers, turn the bull out, and at preg check we only keep those that are bred early. Anything bred late we could market as a bred heifer, which certainly would probably be pretty good in the market the next couple years. Okay, we could also shorten the breeding season length. So maybe we keep some additional heifers and only turn that bull out for somewhere between 25 and 45 days, depending on how close you want to decrease that down to, and then market any open heifers as feeder animals. There's actually a producer up near Sheridan that does this, where he only turns the bull out for about 25 days. And when I've talked to him, he said calving season's great, right? Very short with his heifers. But they've been really successful is taking those open heifers and marketing them as feeder cattle. Okay, there's definitely opportunity. They're still at the appropriate age to get fed out and be as a feeder animal. Okay, the other way would be using reproductive technologies, right? So utilizing some estrus sync, and it doesn't have to be with AI. Okay, it could just be syncing those animals and turning the bulls out. That's going to help shift the proportion of those heifers and help front load how many heifers are bred early, and hopefully front load how many animals are born early in that calving season. Okay, and keep in mind again, you're going to wean heavier calves and stay in the herd longer. So nutrition is another area that I think is important to focus on, especially in that young cow management. Right, we know that nutrition is an important mediator of a lot of different reproductive events. Obviously, we're not going to talk about puberty attainment today, but we know it has a significant influence on cyclicity in those animals. Okay, we know it has a significant influence on the anestrus period, okay, and the ability of those animals to start cycling back. If we don't have good nutrition in those cows, they're at a low body condition score. It is going to take them longer to breed back, right? Especially those young cows, because as we talked about, she has additional nutrient requirements. So she has the highest nutrient requirements in our herd. So she should be the ones that we're thinking about. And as much as I love heifers, I would rather have a low input heifer where I'm maybe doing less feed resources to that heifer, pick the heifer that's going to pick my production environment, and maybe focus some of my better feed resources on these young cows. I've already made a more significant investment into them, right? Making sure they get bred back. And then we also know it can influence longevity and retention. So if we just think about what she's trying to use, so if we're giving her a diet, what she's using that for, okay, first thing she's going to do is work on meeting just her maintenance requirements. So just staying alive, meeting those vital functions that she has. Okay, if she's got nutrients left over, okay, she's going to be thinking about lactation or gestation. Okay, depending on which phase she's in. She's also going to be thinking about growth as a young animal. Okay, that's going to be important to continue to have that animal to grow in her frame size as well as her weight. Now, if she's got anything left over after all of that, then she's going to think about reproduction. Okay, so reproduction is like her last priority, right? If she has to get rid of anything off of the to-do list, fertility and reproduction is going to be the first thing to go. Okay, she's going to worry about feeding that calf, growing herself, meeting her maintenance functions before she starts cycling back. So if we aren't meeting her needs to this level with the nutrients available to her in the diet, she's not going to start cycling back, right? She's going to stay non-cycling or anestrus. Okay, then if she's got anything left after that, then she can think about maybe I can put a little food stores on a spat and save some of that for later. Okay? Other thing to think about is nutrient availability. This is one of those big challenges with those young cows, is think about when they're calving oftentimes in the spring, right? And so a lot of times, maybe depending on when you're calving, forage quality is not quite its best if they're still out on range and we're just supplementing. Not that they can't make it through, but we need to make sure that we're thinking about the forage quality and availability that they have available to them, as well as what we're providing them as a supplement, okay? So this is New Mexico data, okay, because I like the way, they have tons and tons of years of data. I haven't collected that many years of Wyoming data yet, we'll get there, okay? So what this chart is looking at is crude protein on this y-axis, and then 2 years, okay? So this is her year as a heifer, this is gonna be her year as after she's calved the first time and getting rebred, okay? So the orange or yellow lines are gonna be forage crude protein, okay? And how that changes through months throughout the year, okay? So the bottom line is gonna be the lowest value, the middle line is the average, and then the red line is the highest value. And this is what they collected over 18 years worth of collecting data each month, okay? The black line is that heifer's crude protein requirement and how that changes throughout the year, okay? So when we look across that, so this is her very first breeding season, okay, that's the blue. This is when she's gonna calve. This is when we're gonna ask her to rebreed, and this is when she's gonna hopefully calve for the second time. So based on her requirements, how are we doing with matching her up with the forage?
Not very good.
Not great, okay? Not terrible, okay? We're at least close, but we could maybe shift her a little bit, right? And better meet those requirements with the forage that we have available, and better use those feed resources, okay? But again, it's something to think about with when you're calving and what her requirements are, right? You can see when she hits late gestation and peak lactation that we're not meeting those requirements, and we need to be providing her some supplementation during that time point. And they do provide supplementation there. I did not put up the TDN graph because I think it's just above it the whole time because their forage is terrible quality in New Mexico, okay? So one way for us to look at this is by focusing on her body condition score, right? Body condition score is gonna give us an idea of what her past nutrition is, okay, and where she is from an energy reserve standpoint. So our goal is to have those cows roughly around a body condition score 5 or 6, okay, and that could change depending on your management strategies and how many inputs you have, okay, and the reason I bring up body condition scoring, okay, is because we know that body condition scoring at calving has a significant influence on her ability to get bred back during the next breeding season, okay? So if she's in good condition when she calves, she's gonna have a better opportunity to start cycling, so that postpartum and estrus period is going to be shorter, and we're gonna see better pregnancy rates in those animals, okay? So that's what this table is looking at, is body condition scores at calving, and then average pregnancy rates across different studies. And what you see is that as we go from a body condition score of 4, 5, and 6, we're seeing some increases in those pregnancy rates, especially between that body condition score 4 and 5. So it would tell me her body condition score and where she's at calving, especially as a young cow, is gonna be really important. Because again, her nutrient requirements get really high late gestation and into getting peak lactation. It's gonna be really hard for us to catch up if she's at a 4 and we want her at a 5 by breeding. Same thing illustrated here. This study was just looking at body condition score at calving versus the number of cows cycling during the breeding season. Okay, so again, you can see we're comparing a body condition score of 4, 5, and 6, and then looking at the percentage of cows cycling 20 days into the breeding season, 40 days into the breeding season, and then 60 days into the breeding season. Okay, it should be concerning that those animals at a body condition score of 4, even at 60 days into the breeding season, only 74% of those animals are cycling. It's going to be really hard to get good preg rates when only 74% are cycling if you only have a 60-day breeding season. Okay, so making sure those animals, again, at that better body condition score is going to be important. Okay. Now the question that usually comes after that is, well, if she's, can I catch up, right? If she's at a body condition score 4 or 5, okay, can I push her, feed her some extra resources, and catch up? Okay, so there was a study done a couple years ago where they looked at cow body condition score at calving and separated them into those that were below a 5 and those that were above a 5, and then they had 3 different nutritional treatments. So they either put them to lose weight, maintain weight, or gain weight. And then they looked at pregnancy rate at time day I. So in our below 5 group, highest we got, even if they were gaining weight, was about 42%. That's still not great, right? Not terrible, but not great. Okay? Those that were above 5, even if they were losing weight, they had a similar pregnancy rate to those that were gaining weight and below 5. Okay? So that body condition score at calving determines her body condition score at the start of breeding. It's really hard with those additional nutrient requirements, especially in our young cows, to get her to recover and gain that weight back and be successful during the breeding season. Okay? So I threw this table in there just to consider the timing of gain needed. Okay, so showing you at calving what body condition score, if our goal is to be at a 5. Obviously, if she's at a 5 at calving, she needs to gain no weight. We're just maintaining. Okay. So, for example, if we were at a body condition score 3 at calving, we wanted her to be at a 5. She would roughly need to put on about 160 pounds. We had 80 days to breeding. She'd have to gain 2 pounds a day. It's going to be a little bit harder to do. Okay. If she only had 40 days to go from a 3 to 5, she'd basically need to be in a feedlot, right? She'd need to be gaining about 4 pounds a day, and I don't know that any of you want to spend the money to feed a cow like that, right? So just be thinking about the timing of that and kind of when we need to evaluate that, right? If we're looking at body condition score at calving, it's too late. We need to be thinking about that maybe at weaning or earlier in the winter so that we can help fix that and have her headed towards that good number before that. Now I will say that a lot of those studies that I just showed you were done not in a western arid type environment, okay? A lot of them were done in the Midwest where there's a few more feed resources. Cows typically are closer to a body condition score 6, okay? So I really like to always throw this up as like I just told you this, but here's kind of the opposite, okay? So what about the adaptability of cows to their production environment? So this was a study done by Travis Mullenix when he was at New Mexico State University working on his PhD. And what they did was they took, these are young cows, 2 and 3-year-old cows, and they just classified them based on if they were body condition score 4, 5, or 6 at calving, okay? And then they just looked at their performance over time. So they didn't try to alter their body condition score. They didn't feed them any differently. They just let them naturally be at these body condition scores 4, 5, and 6. And they looked at all kinds of metrics, but the one that I thought was really important was both the days to first postpartum ovulation, very consistent, whether they were body condition score 4, 5, or 6. And pregnancy rate was 92, 91, and 90% in those cows, young cows, at a body condition score 4, 5, or 6. I will say that at this specific research center, I got to work there, so I know how they manage these cows. They've done a lot of selection pressure for those cows to perform at a body condition score 4 from a reproductive standpoint. So this is not me telling you, drop your cows to a 4, it's going to be totally fine. If you currently have your cows at a 5 or 6, keep them there. Don't drop them. I'm not telling you to drop them. I'm just telling you that cows do have the adaptability, and we can place selection pressure for more low input type cattle, and we can get them to perform from a reproduction standpoint at a body condition score 4 or 5, okay, in our more western and arid environments, okay. Other thing to think about from a nutritional standpoint is the potential use of ionophores, okay. So ionophore, like a monensin or rumensin product, okay. We've seen some pretty significant positive results in both heifers as well as in our mature cows. Okay, there's still, majority of the ionophore research is done in more growing cattle or feedlot type cattle, but there are some studies that have looked at utilizing an ionophore in addition to the supplementation and how that impacts reproduction in both heifers as well as cows. So this, and I'm happy to send you guys these slides. I know there's lots of numbers and words on there. It might be kind of small for those of you in the back. Okay, so this table on this left side is looking at the postpartum interval over about 5 different studies where they compared utilizing an ionophore versus those animals that were not receiving an ionophore. And what you see is that majority of those studies, we see some decrease in the postpartum interval in those animals receiving that ionophore in addition to their supplementation. There's actually a more recent kind of review paper or meta-analysis paper where they reported that resumption of estrus after calving was decreased by about 18 days across several studies with the inclusion of monensin in the diet of lactating mature beef cows. Okay. Similar thing here, they're comparing feeding no monensin or monensin to cows and looking at calving percentage, and we see a significant increase in calving percentage. Again, they're resuming cyclicity a little bit faster. Okay, the advantage there is that ionophore is helping feed efficiency and ruminal fermentation. So we're shifting that acetate to propionate ratio to be more beneficial to those animals. So kind of to sum up the ionophores, cows and heifers fed an ionophore have a shorter postpartum interval, but they do still need adequate energy in the diet. Okay, so it doesn't mean if you include an ionophore in the diet, you don't have to still provide adequate nutrition for them. They still need adequate energy. And it also should be noted that cows that are well managed, okay, so cows that would naturally have a shorter postpartum interval because they're in a good body condition, they're well managed from a nutritional standpoint, you may not see that significant decrease in that postpartum interval. Okay? But there is some advantages there from a reproductive standpoint as well as the potential reduction in feed costs through that improved feed efficiency and reduced intake we see because of that ionophore. Other management strategies to be thinking about is thinking about dystocia, right? So we know that that's going to be a problem that we think about in those first calf heifers, right? But we really need to also not just be thinking about it because we don't like pulling calves, right? But because we know that heifers that experience dystocia are at a greater risk of not cycling back and being cold, right? We know that there's some significant damage that can happen if we have severe dystocia, and it is kind of a common problem in those first calf heifers. So probably nothing new that you guys haven't already heard, but be thinking about sire selection, specifically looking at Calvinese direct, okay? I would say still pay attention to the birth weight EPD and the actual birth weight of the bull, but the focus there should be on Calvinese direct. That EPD does take into consideration the birth weight EPD as well, so it's within that calculation. So if I have to pick one to focus more on, that Calvinese direct is where I'm going to put more of my focus. Okay. Be thinking about how to get bulls that have higher accuracy on those heifers, right? When we go buy bulls, it's bull sale season, right? When we're going and buying yearling bulls, there's not a lot of accuracy associated with those EPDs just because there's not a lot of data. That is where there is some advantage to either using a more proven bull, such as an AI sire, right, where we have a lot of data available to those. I'm not trying to push you to AI, I promise, okay? But there is some advantages that we have a lot of accuracy available with those sires and with those EPDs, whereas those unproven bulls, there's a little more unknown, and there is an opportunity to buy a Calvinese bull that maybe isn't quite as Calvinese as you want it to be, okay? One of the last things I'll touch on is thinking about estrus synchronization. So remember when we talked about, I had the graph that showed uterine involution and then she needs to have a short luteal phase, okay? That jumpstart of progesterone, so that short luteal phase will kind of help jumpstart her cyclicity. And we know that utilizing products that have progesterone or GnRH can help jumpstart those animals into cyclicity. So there might be some advantage in those young cows to utilizing estrus synchronization, okay? Helping provide, that cedar is going to provide that short progesterone jump they need to prime that system and can jumpstart them to start cycling again, okay? So, really good review paper a couple years ago that put together 4 different studies where they were doing fixed time day-eye protocols. They were using a cedar-based estrus synchronization protocol, and when they looked at pregnancy rates in those that were cyclic, as well as those animals that were anestrus but they still bred, okay, they still synced them, they still bred them, pregnancy rates were very similar among those, okay, because we can jumpstart cyclicity in those animals by utilizing those progesterone products, okay? I got ahead of myself. I have it written there on the slide for you guys, okay? So, again, doesn't necessarily mean you have to time AI. Could be utilizing one of these ester sync protocols and then turning a bull out. But that kind of priming of the system with the progesterone can be an advantage if we know we have kind of a cyclicity problem in those animals. Other thing that we talked about, remember the other challenge was the suckling of those calves. So we can manipulate the suckling frequency, and that can provide some advantages. I don't necessarily love the idea of removing that calf and early weaning in every situation. Obviously, if calves are in really poor condition, we're in a drought situation, there's maybe some advantages to early weaning from a cow management and reproduction standpoint. There has been some studies done where they looked at temporary removal of calves, so pulling the calves off of cows before they were going to AI for about 42 hours, and they did see some advantages there. Again, that really wouldn't work if you're in a natural service full breeding situation. Okay, you would be looking at early weaning in that situation. Would need to consider kind of the timing and how that relates to potential increases in reproductive performance, the extra management associated with having those young calves. We're trying to market those younger, smaller calves, but it can be an effective tool for managing body condition score. Again, I'd be very cautious there, really only in a drought situation where it's kind of a last resort. Hopefully we're able to have her in a better condition where we're not thinking about having to do that, because there's certainly some economic and management consequences. So this slide just kind of wraps everything up, and I'm, again, happy to email these to anybody so that you guys have it. But kind of the things that we talked about, right? Selection and development for those early calving or early breeding animals. Okay, that's going to provide some long-term advantages to us from a weaning weight perspective for those calves, as well as the longevity of those animals. Utilizing EPDs to ensure those heifers are bred to calving these bulls. Might be able to consider using AI for those higher accuracy sires. One thing we haven't really talked about is consider calving heifers 2 weeks prior to the cow herd, right? So getting those heifers bred a little bit earlier. So turning the bull out or AIing several weeks before the rest of your mature cow herd, that gives her some additional time, a couple more weeks to recover before we're going to move her into that mature cow herd. So might provide some time advantage for her there. Okay, think about the nutritional management. Can we use a different supplementation strategy? Can we shift things to kind of get her to match up with our environment better? Could we maybe think about utilizing an ionophore as a way to improve feed efficiency and ruminal fermentation? And then how can we maybe use estrus synchronization as a tool to kind of help us jumpstart some cyclicity in those young estrus cows? So I think I left a few minutes for questions. I promise I was not trying to auctioneer up here. Okay, just trying to get through all the stuff I wanted to talk about. So, any questions? I just stunned you all with too much information.
I know your talk wasn't on nutrition, but in your experience, what do you find most producers are lacking, if anything?
Criticize us, go.
I think that's a hard one. I think it depends on the time of year and what feeding system you're using. Most of the time, if they have adequate forage availability, protein is kind of the area I want to start with. But if forage availability isn't good or the TDN is really low in the forage we have available, then it's kind of a combination of protein and energy. We can make Scott chime in the back too.
Good answer. I think protein is usually what you're looking for. So.
And I'm always happy to answer questions, so all of the contact is up there, so feel free to call, email. I don't look at the Facebook Messenger stuff all the time, so if you message me on there, it'll be a little slower response. Any other questions? If not, you guys are free to go, I'm not gonna hold you hostage.
One thing, a person when first calf, I just want to make sure that you have them there early, because if you're trying to catch up before eating all that, those things down. That gets you in the worst wreck than anything else.
Oh, yeah.
So we're all here from college, and Keith said we have to get a picture.
Make sure
So,
they
like,
were
that's
there.
Verification, right?
Okay, Kyle and a person.
Trust but verify.
Yeah, we-